Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. This is Lewayne. Just a quick note before we get going with episode 15. We've reached a bandwidth limit on our current hosting site. Until we get that resolved, early episodes will drop off to make room for new ones. Copies of all our episodes will remain on YouTube, so they'll still be accessible. They just won't be downloadable. Thanks for your patience while we get this sorted out. Now, on with the show.
Is traditional America gone for good? I believe traditional America can come back, but it will take a very special person to make that happen. Secularism is certainly eroding traditional power, no question about it. The key question going forward is this secular progressive movement good for Americans, no matter what their ethnicity or economic condition? And the answer is no. Secular progressives champion a do-your-own-thing philosophy. No judgments about personal behavior are allowed in that arena. And that's now wreaking havoc on American society. Minorities are more affected by poverty because the traditional family unit has broken down in those precincts. And rather than trying to reverse that, secular progressives want more entitlement spending. Nothing about changing libertine attitudes. They don't want limitations on so-called private behavior, no judgments. I believe the majority of Americans can be persuaded that the far left is a dangerous outfit, bent on destroying traditional America and replacing it with a social free-fire zone.
So in case you haven't heard, Bill O'Reilly is taking a vacation. He made the announcement on his show earlier this week. Even threw up a little guessing game on the website for the fans, like a cut the shit Sonny Where's Waldo. The timing of his departure is the stuff political cartoons are made of. A plane taking off into the sunshine in one panel while flames consume 1211 Avenue of the Americas in the other. I guess I am a little curious. In which paradise will this mega-rich primetime bloviator sequester himself while the fire threatens to burn his life's work to the ground? You see, O'Reilly has been having a rough year. Most recently, the New York Times published a damning article which claimed, among saucier details, that Billo, Mr. Judeo-Christian Values, has cost Fox News $13 million in settlements paid to 5 women who were each the recipient of unwanted sexual advances and/or other forms of abuse. They say their careers were threatened directly by O'Reilly. And near as we can tell here at Swing State, the only response O'Reilly has given, except for a sad, non-specific statement about putting the controversy to rest for his family, is that once you work for a company, you owe that company loyalty. If you don't like the culture of the workplace, don't let the door hit you on the way out. This follows on the heels of an unfortunate legal turn last spring. Billo's daughter told the court that she had seen traditional values O'Reilly choking her mother, Maureen McPhilmy, and that they didn't want to live with him anymore. He lost the custody battle. None of this is, of course, particularly shocking to non-Fox News viewers who have paid any attention to what the world outside the right-wing echo chamber has to say, either about Bill O'Reilly or Fox News. Around the time of the Republican convention last summer, the explosive story of Roger Ailes, CEO, chairman, and principal architect of the Fox News channel, appeared in the media. Host Gretchen Carlson threw open the curtains and light poured in, exposing a serial sexual predator who ran his infotainment network like a harem. And the women of the network, seemingly all of them, kept their jobs not because of their work or professionalism, but based on whether or not they would sexually satisfy Jabba the Roger. Her work thus finished, Carlson quit and sued the network. They settled out of court for $20 million. Shortly after the New York Times story confirmed that Billo was also to blame for the dystopian corporate culture at Fox News, the exodus began. Advertisers bolted for the door at a rate that ought to be a second political cartoon, with little stick-legged logos for Lexus, Advil, and H&R Block scurrying like rats from a sinking ship captained by a smirking, splotchy-faced O'Reilly. But for about a week, Bill maintained his vulture's perch atop the pseudo-journalism outlet he more or less built with his friend Roger. His audience, at least so far, has not been dissuaded from tuning in, which would ordinarily be remarkable, but for Fox viewers it is just the latest con they failed to spot from sheer lack of relevant information. Nobody, for instance, who knew about the Andrea Macra scandal in 2004, or who was familiar with Billo's tendency to alter history in his Killing Historical Persons series to make himself seem more central to it, would be surprised to learn the truth about Bill. Look, there is a point in here, and it's not just to glory in yet another right-wing virtue-monger collapsing under the weight of his own bluster and bullshit, because this seems to be a pattern. Show me the man. Always a man, too. Claiming to be the lone voice of morality in a TV universe filled with secularists, and I will show you a fraud. And make no mistake, that is what Bill O'Reilly is. Whatever his qualities as a broadcaster or interviewer, O'Reilly started his career heaping coals upon the head of Bill Clinton, and now he joins the ranks of Newt Gingrich and Ken Starr, just another lying debauch looking at himself in the mirror, lying into the mirror, the same way he lies into the camera, lies to his wife, lies to his kids, and lies to the country. As someone who is aligned with the political left, I am approaching a crisis of empathy. What more can I say to someone who watches Fox News, who turns to a hypocrite like Bill O'Reilly, a filthy stain of a person, for a sermon on traditional values, or any values at all? What do I say to a person who is willing to vote for a president who admitted on tape to this very same sort of behavior? There really are only so many options. If you don't know the truth about Bill O'Reilly and Roger Ailes and Donald Trump, you're either ignorant or a fool. On the other hand, if you do know the truth, but simply fail to see the relevance of it, or worse, don't care at all that this man and men like him have done these things to women, there's something wrong. Really, truly wrong. And there is something wrong with the American right wing, and there has been my entire life. It's more than a few individuals failing to live up to a standard. It's an entire culture, from pill-popping Limbaugh to the Fox News channel, assuming a perch on a moral mountaintop high above the swamp of secularism, outwardly preaching nonsense about traditional values while inwardly monsters run the joint. It's empty, all of it, and worse than empty, it is a peerless form of hypocrisy that has over time eroded American democracy and clouded the ability of otherwise decent people to think rationally, because instead of turning to journalists and experts in relevant fields for the news of the day, they turn to what Jon Stewart called Bullshit Mountain, of which O'Reilly is the king, or at least he was. Speculation is rampant that the young Murdoch boys, whose super-rich Australian father owns the parent company of Fox, want Billo to stay on vacation permanently. It would be an ignominious end. He would simply disappear from the airwaves. No goodbyes, no farewells, no sober reflection on a lifetime spent spinning in the no-spin zone. Just gone. Poof, like the women whose careers he derailed out of smallness and spite when they wouldn't join him in his hotel room. Maybe that's a fitting end to the O'Reilly factor, one that reminds us karma is in our culture characterized as feminine, and she's a real bitch.
The sleep of reason brings forth monsters.
I'm a whiner, and I keep whining and whining until I win.
Maybe somebody will rise up.
We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty.
Welcome to Swing State, an aggressive, progressive, critical, and political podcast from the middle of the Midwest. Welcome back to Swing State. So far, the U.S. is still standing despite Trump's best efforts. I'm Lewayne. The Bill O'Reilly fan you just heard from is AJ. If you're a regular listener of the show, you know that both of us escaped religion and conservatism at various points in our life. By the time I met AJ, I'd already kicked myself loose, but AJ hadn't yet. He tried to sell me on O'Reilly as an interesting guy. Little did we know how interesting he actually was.
Yeah, I think it's like what we said a week or two ago. We're all prisoners of the things we don't know. And one of the interesting things that is mirrored in this Bill O'Reilly case that's going on now is how the audience remains blissfully unaware of much of what is going on. The information is simply not available. And unless you deliberately leave the isolation of Fox News, you know, the fair and balanced network that stands firm against the liberal tide... Unless you go out of your way to do that, you won't have the information because they're never going to give it to you.
Sorry, I was trying to restrain the laughter. The fair and balanced thing always bothered me, even when I might have been willing to accept it, because I'm like, if you've got to tell me how fair and balanced you are, it probably sounds like bullshit.
I mean, I know it's a little cliche, but it is Orwellian. The
Yes.
fair and balanced slogan is just straight up Orwellian.
Yes, it is.
One of the things that's interesting about this sexual harassment case that, you know, I was unaware of this actually until now, that this information was available. There was a court document that was filed way back in 2004. It was filed by Andrea Macris. It's a complaint against defendant Bill O'Reilly. And I just want to give you a bit of this so that you know the kind of information that has been circulating about Bill O'Reilly for a long time and is now, in recent weeks, as we mentioned in the Broadside, it's been corroborated.
What was the date on that again? You said 2004?
Yeah. Yes, it was in 2004.
Yeah, we're talking about 13 fucking years this guy's been doing shit like this.
Filed October 13th, 2004.
Jesus Christ.
All right, and this is a piece from that document. At approximately 11:06 p.m. on or about September 1st, 2004, during the course of the Republican National Convention, defendant Bill O'Reilly telephoned plaintiff Andrea Macris on her cell phone and asked that she call. Macris believed that the call would be work-related and returned the call. Instead, defendant Bill O'Reilly once again launched into a lewd and lascivious, unsolicited, and disturbing sexually graphic talk, despite informing him that she was not at all interested in the conversation, and despite her adamant refusal to participate in such talk, defendant O'Reilly informed plaintiff Andrea Macris that he was watching a porn movie and babbled perversely regarding his fantasies concerning Caribbean vacations because, purportedly, once people get into that hot weather, they shed their inhibitions. You know, they drink during the day and lay there and lazy, and they have their dinner and then they come back and fool around. That's basically the modus operandi. And then this is where it starts to get a little bit stranger. Apparently this was taped, or somehow they have a transcript of this information, or Macris just has a photographic memory, but here Billow goes on. During the course of his monologue, defendant O'Reilly further stated, "Well, if I took you down there and I'd want to take a shower with you right away, that would be the first thing I'd do. Yeah, we'd check into the room and we would order up some room service, and you'd definitely get 2 wines into you as quickly as I could get them into you. Maybe intravenously, get those glasses of wine into you. You would basically be in the shower, and then I would come in and I'd join you and you would have your back to me, and I would take that little loofah thing and kind of soap up your back, rub it all over you, get you to relax, hot water, and you'd feel the tension drain out of you, and you would still be with your back to me, and then I would kind of put my arm, it's one of those mitts, those loofah mitts, so I got my hands in it, and I would put that front, kind of rub your tummy a little bit with it, and then with my other hand I would start to massage your boobs, get your nipples really hard." That's Boston now, I don't know what I'm doing. "Because I like that, and you have really spectacular boobs. So anyway, I'd be rubbing your big boobs and getting your nipples really hard, kind of kissing your neck from behind, and then I would take the other hand with the falafel thing, and I'd put it on your pussy, but you'd have to do it really light, just kind of the tease business."
I'm just going to interrupt you for a second. This has to be the least erotic thing I have ever heard in my entire life. And I tried to read 50 Shades.
I don't know. It sounds like he's trying to put together a really difficult erector set or something. It's not. I'm not sure what this is. I mean, I know what it is, but I'm not sure why it's this way. It's like the uncanny. Something's just off about it.
Is there more that you want to get into? Because there's some observations I want to make whenever you're finished.
Well, just to set the context, you remember Bill O'Reilly's sitting somewhere, apparently with his hand down his pants doing this. So the next time you see his big strange face appear in the camera, think about him reading that with his hand down his pants on national TV, like one of those stage fright tricks, only it'll help people get rid of the Fox News fugue.
There are a couple of things about that I was struck by immediately, aside from, oh my god, that's the worst shit I've ever heard. The first thing I want to draw attention to is, way back before the 50 Shades of Bill started, she said she didn't want to have this conversation. Now, I know that the concept of consent is sort of hazy for a lot of Republican guys, but she doesn't even want to talk about sex with you, Bill. She's definitely not going to get in the shower with you and let you rub the falafel thingy on her. So that's my first issue with this. My second issue with this is, Bill has written fiction before, right?
Yes, a thriller, I think.
Was it a solo thing, or did he actually write it with a...
I'm pretty sure it was a one-time gig for
Okay,
Bill.
Because I gotta tell you, based on the transcript that you just read, Bill can't write a scene either. And this is all funny, because it's fucking ridiculous, because it's Bill O'Reilly's splotchy face that you see when you're talking about this stuff. But the problem is, it's an example of this sort of weird thing that's not exclusive to the right or to Republicans, because I think we've all heard plenty about Bill Clinton's various escapades.
I heard about them from Bill O'Reilly.
Of course you did, because I'm sure Bill had plenty of things to say about what a person of low character Clinton was for having that sort of behavior. It sort of provides a fairly obvious example of something that a lot of us sort of view as a staple of the right or the Republican, particularly when you get these alpha males who think that they really actually are all of that, except that they're not. You have this sort of thing where you have a guy like O'Reilly who thinks because he's powerful and because maybe he's got some money that he can, grab him by the pussy, as the now current president has said.
They actually use that now in Fox News training videos. No shit. They use it in Fox News training videos as an example of improper workplace conduct.
So their workplace don't do this is don't behave like the president of the United fucking States.
Whatever you fucking do not hold yourself to the standards of practice in the workplace that the president does.
This country is so fucked.
It's a little topsy-turvy.
No, never mind, because I already said I wasn't going to say shit about Trump voters, but god damn it.
It's the fucking inmates running the asylum. There's no other way to explain this, what's happening in the country, unless you understand how many people are willing to put aside any kind of moral sense that they have, any sort of ethical lines or things that they believe exist. They're willing to trash all of that for people like Bill O'Reilly and Donald Trump and Roger Ailes. I use the word amazing a lot, but it's amazing. It's incredible to me that this is even possible, but here it is. It's on the front. It's in Vox. It's on the front page of every magazine, the liberal media. It's on the front page of all of them. What is going on?
But we brought Bill Clinton up on blowjob charges.
Correct me if I'm wrong. The Lewinsky thing was consensual. I mean, I know it
was inappropriate
right.
and certainly outside the bounds of his marriage.
Yes, but there was a yes. There was some form of consent. To me, what is happening here with Bill O'Reilly is infinitely stranger and creepier. Maybe because of the phone aspect. I don't know. I've never heard.
But she also says no.
And yet here he is with the falafel thing, doing God knows what on the other end. How does he then get up the next day and talk about Judeo-Christian values? Or values at all, for that matter.
This is 2004 that you were talking about, that this transcript occurred, because you were talking about the Republican National Convention, right? This isn't just an isolated incident, though, like he was just high on Republicanism that day. You've made it clear that this is a pattern of behavior.
Yes, Fox News has settled 5 lawsuits just with Bill O'Reilly. Just with Bill O'Reilly. This guy cost them $13 million just to settle the people he's talked with about the falafel thingy. Yeah, it's a pattern here in the office.
$13 million, did you say?
Yeah, $13 million, just for O'Reilly.
Just for O'Reilly, for five settlements.
5 settlements. And God even knows how many actual cases there are, like in reality, how many women have in some way experienced Bill O'Reilly's falafel.
Goddamn falafel. This is a guy who thinks he knows how words go together, and that's what he came up with.
This guy has a word of the day segment on the end of every O'Reilly film. At least he did back in the day when I watched it. It would always be the word of the day. Sometimes I think he repeated the word. He liked, like, perspicacious. It's kind of like a tick. I think he enjoys those words with the ush at the end of them.
See, this is the thing. If you'd have told me when you were trying to convince me to watch this show that he had a word of the day, I would have probably watched it just to see what fucking idiotic words he came up with. Considering his audience, they don't have to be really complex words. The one you were talking about, perspicacious, that seems like one that even his audience is going to look like, why is he saying them fancy words?
I would say that, except I think that my grandparents who watched the O'Reilly Factor have done like the crossword puzzle in the newspaper every day since like 1932. So
this is their thing.
Yeah, I think they probably appreciated the word of the day segment. I don't know how much they're going to appreciate it now.
That's kind of amazing. But like we said before, this is sort of a pattern, not just with O'Reilly and not even with Fox, but within members of the Republican Party. And I'm going to give the disclaimer that I probably should give more often, which is, when I'm talking about the right and Republicans, we all know I don't literally mean every single one of these fucking people. I'm talking about people that are exhibiting this specific behavior, okay? Because we all know stories of various Republicans, usually the most rabidly anti-gay ones, who then get caught having sex with other dudes, or in a few cases, soliciting sex from underage dudes. The fact that they have a sexual interest outside of what some people consider the norm is not my issue, okay? Whatever works for you, as long as it's consensual and you're talking about adults, I don't care.
The Caribbean shower, I mean, the weird part is being on the phone talking to somebody who doesn't want...
Right, who's not into it.
Yeah, somebody who's like, sir, I just want to order the pizza. I'm going to come over then.
Yeah. See, if she's into it and she wants to listen to him ramble on about the falafel, sure, fine, whatever. But that's not what's going on. You have people who've made a career out of pointing out the moral failings of others. And not only pointing out these supposed moral failings, but indicating that these moral failings are why these people are in whatever terrible position they're in. That's the part that we're pissed off about. Consensual sex, whatever, don't give a shit. Consensual phone sex, fine, whatever, don't give a shit. The problem is these people have gone out of their way to do as much harm as possible to people who don't fit their particular moral mold, and yet they behave like this.
If I can just say something for a second, because as I'm sitting here thinking about it, I'm actually, at this point, I am so overawed by the hypocrisy and just the brazen nature of it now. I am so overawed by it that I'm almost beyond angry. I'm almost turning to like psychology now to figure out how in the hell do people internally live with these two conflicting things that are happening. Because on the one hand, Bill O'Reilly goes out every night and he sits there and he stares into the camera like he's fucking John Wayne defending, the moral little settlers on the hilltop from the evil world around them. And then as soon as he's done with that, he goes off stage, gets into his hotel room or wherever he's at, picks up the phone and talks about Caribbean shower fantasies. How in the world does somebody internally not just explode? Well, maybe he does. Maybe that explains we'll do it live. Fuck it. Maybe that explains this. I don't know. But it's more to me than angering. It's very strange.
It's sort of uncomfortable. The only explanation that I can offer, and I don't know that this is going to ease your mind any, there are one of two things. Either he just simply somehow survives with this bizarre cognitive dissonance that he can behave in these two different ways. I guess the one that I always sort of assumed when dealing with people like O'Reilly, and really with every fucking televangelist you see who gets caught diddling a secretary or whatever, I think part of it is simply they don't actually believe it. I think that they're playing a part. And it's because it's a profitable part. Because I don't know that much about O'Reilly beyond what I see now. I don't know what his career was like prior to becoming a Fox darling. But if he's anything like Glenn Beck as an example, Glenn Beck was just a radio jock who was doing morning zoo shit for a long period of time until he hit the angry religious conservative thing. And then all of a sudden he's a fucking multimillionaire. And he's got book deals and he's speaking and he's doing all these rallies and shit. That's what I see when I see guys like O'Reilly and Beck and most of those, Limbaugh in particular. Oh, okay. I have no idea whether he believes shit. I don't know that it even matters to him at this point anymore.
Well, I mean, he can take a Valium, I guess, or whatever if he gets
with the Oxy.
Yeah, the Oxy.
But I get that because these guys ultimately are paid performers, and so I understand.
Very well paid.
Yes. And so for me, I guess that's always how I sort of looked at it. Now, I personally would be sort of uncomfortable with making a career that way, doing something that's so diametrically opposed to what I'm actually like. It also doesn't explain a lot of the politicians that we have to deal with, particularly at the state level. I mean, sure, I know they get contributions and there's money and stuff, but it feels like there's something different going on there. But that's the closest explanation I can offer you for dealing with that cognitive dissonance with these particular guys, is that it's just a job like anything else.
Power of denial is just incredible. Incredible for what it must be like for Bill O'Reilly, because Mr. Tough Guy, he has not, as of today, as of this broadcast, he has not said a damn thing in response to this. Typically, because of his machismo image, the thing to do would be to, the moment he hears about it, immediately respond in the most forceful language possible. Instead, he released some ridiculous statement about how he's going to put to rest the controversy to spare his family, who has deserted him, I think.
The controversy.
Yeah, the controversy.
The 5 women at least.
And he is going to put it to rest. How? It's not resting now, Bill. Your advertisers are running for the fucking hills.
What that means, when I hear somebody's going to put something to rest, they're going to just shut that shit off.
Yeah.
They're not resolving it. They're just going to stop that shit from happening, is all that amounts to. Good luck with that, Bill. We have the internet.
Well, and if there is any consolation here, it seems that according to a Vox article that was published on April 11th, the title is "The Potential Legal Train Wreck Ahead for Fox News and Bill O'Reilly." I'm not going to give you the article entirely, but just to kind of point out that the problem now that Fox News has is they are actually under investigation themselves. Bill O'Reilly is being investigated by Fox News itself. I think they're going to find that he's very good for their cable packaging. That's probably going to be the first thing on the report, and then after that it'll be some, there's a few girls and whatever. But the problem is that Fox News, when all of this gets to the court phase, they're going to have a really hard time showing that as a company, they did anything to prevent sexual harassment or to punish any of this conduct or to help people who wanted to bring it to light, especially the female anchors. I think I told you off mic, way back in the day when I was still watching Fox News, or at least, intermittently watching Fox News, I remember Lori Dew was on the network sometimes, and then one day she just disappeared, and I always wondered, what the hell happened to Lori Dew? Well, come to find out, apparently Bill O'Reilly happened to her, or Roger Ailes, who the fuck knows. But Fox News, they're going to have some troubles here potentially because no one is going to look at what they're doing and say, yes, they have a safe workplace culture. And the fact that they are actually settling the lawsuits is kind of bad for them, because why would you settle a lawsuit if you didn't do anything wrong?
Well, that's just it. Regardless of the actual nature of the settlement, the fact that you settle always looks suspicious. And when you settle 5 fucking times...
Oh, hey, Trumpkins, Trump University, Trump University, Trump University. Sorry, I just had to throw that in there.
Just a reminder...
$50 million, Trumpkins.
From the guy who doesn't settle.
He doesn't settle. Except when he settles Trump University, Trump University, Trump University for $50 million.
While we're on the sort of casually brushing against the topic of the president, more specifically, what I'm interested in bringing into this discussion is the vice president. We were talking before about this sort of behavior among alpha male Republicans and how they just treat women. Vice President Pence has been put forth by some as some sort of moral beacon, because word got out that he follows what has often been referred to as the Billy Graham rule, which is that he will not have dinner alone with a woman who isn't his wife, which is a statement he made back in 2002. But he has also not said that, that's not how I am now. I mean, so I have to take him at his word that remains the same.
I just almost want to wonder how that works on a practical level as the vice president. I mean, there are a lot of people I can imagine there wouldn't be too many situations where you'd be having dinner with a woman that isn't your spouse by yourself.
Right.
But if you're the vice president...
There are a couple of different things about that. One, the extremely religious right just came all over themselves when he said stuff like that, because it's the type of thing that reminds women of several things at once. One of them is that they're not real people. When somebody like Pence says he will not be alone with a woman who isn't his wife, that sounds sort of like old-fashioned and haha, that's sort of funny. But what I hear is a couple of different things. One of them is, this is the same type of guy who in a different culture would be telling women to put a fucking burqa on. Okay? Because he can't fucking control himself. Because that's what I hear when he says he can't be alone with another woman. He either thinks he's fucking irresistible and they're going to throw themselves on him, or because he's fucking hyper-religious, he thinks that he won't be able to control himself because he's a fucking sinful human being.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing the train of thought you have to take to even try and empathize with what he might be thinking as to setting this rule. To me, it's very difficult to get there. Even if you're religious, there aren't too many people who, in my circles anyway, who would have went, yeah, right on, Mike, you good for you.
Well, that's just it. Even the religious people I know, even the more conservative religious ones I know, would be like, well, that's kind of weird, Mike. Are you feeling okay? But here's the problem that I really see with it in practical terms. I mean, what it says about him is that women are a sexual object that he can't resist.
Or at least that aspect of it has to set up boundaries within society so that he can feel safe.
But from a more practical standpoint, how does that work when Trump's not available and Angela Merkel has to have a meeting with Pence? How does that work?
Yeah, that was my question. Like, practically speaking, don't you have any aides? Don't you have any senior aides that are female? Maybe not.
Well, he may not, and that may actually be that may be the secondary problem. That he's basically, by the nature of this religious attitude that he's got, I'm going to call it religious, although I don't think it really is. By having this religious attitude, that also disincentivizes him from hiring females for anything. If there's a risk that he's going to be alone with them, okay, well, I guess your secretary is going to have to be a guy, or your assistant, or whatever your staff has to be all male. And I can't even begin to tell you the problems with that, both legally and morally speaking.
And like we were talking about off mic, I think one of the really interesting things about this particular bit of information, I'm not exactly sure where this came from, but the fact that people's response to it these days are more like our response and less like John and the Pew's response, I think that speaks a lot to the times we're living in, which is, it just baffles me why Trump picked some of the people he picked. The kinds of people that he surrounded himself with, they just don't strike me as his kind of people.
Fortune magazine, that liberal magazine.
Right, the rag.
Makes this interesting point. Reverse that position. Say that Pence is a female vice president, and she has that same position. I will not be alone with a man. First of all, practical standpoint, how the fuck does that work when men still pretty much run most of the shit? But how weak does that make you look as a person?
So I'm saying the species is about 50-50, more or less. If you reverse the two, the situation almost becomes comic. It's like a farce. You would make a Monty Python sketch. No, I won't possibly see a man today. That would be the level that we're talking about.
Simply a narrowing of what Republicans have been doing, which is trying to reduce female access to power, to make it harder for them to even get access to power, let alone actually wield that power. Years ago, when I still lived in the small town that I lived in, one of the people I interacted with fairly regularly was a lawyer who is female, which is only relevant that she's female because of how this plays into the story. When another female lawyer came into town, the first female lawyer told me how grateful she was because she actually had someone she could discuss deals with in the restroom like the guys always do. There'd be a recess, the lawyers would go off and take a leak and sort shit out and then come back and then tell her what they were going to do. She's like, I don't even have access to the communication. They're having these meetings in an area that specifically cuts me off. This is just an expansion of that same principle. You cannot work a deal with me because you can't have access to me. The analogy is super weird because I'm talking about lawyers peeing and nobody cares about that. But the point remains that she was cut off from certain aspects of the business that just occurred naturally simply because she was a woman. And what Pence is doing is just an expansion of that same thing. No, I'm not going to meet with you. Why? Because you're a woman. Think about that for a second. You have a vagina and a uterus, and I cannot talk to you.
Not alone, anyway. It's very symptomatic of a lot of other weird shit that we see when you start to get into the religious side of things, but maybe that's for another episode. If there is a bit of good news in the world today, it's that we have a special election coming up, and right now the Democrats seem like they're about to score a point.
Well, this community where I grew up is a moderate, pragmatic district, economically minded. I think it recognizes that extremism is bad for business. It wants effective, principled leadership. Doesn't identify as particularly partisan or ideological. I think that's one of the reasons the president had some difficulty here, and why I'm building a coalition that includes Republicans and independents, as well as Democrats, by focusing on local economic development and shared values in the community that bring people together. We are doubling down right now on a win on Tuesday because it is within reach. The grassroots intensity in Georgia is unlike anything that I've seen in this community before.
John Ossoff, Democratic candidate for Georgia's 6th Congressional District.
For those of you who missed it or don't recall when I was talking about John Ossoff before, there's a special election in Georgia's 6th Congressional District that was opened up when Tom Price went to Health and Human Services. Ossoff is the leading Democratic contender for that position. He has one other Democratic contender who has basically zero support, so it's pretty much down to Ossoff. And I was excited to hear about this for a variety of reasons, not the least of which being, hey, there's a opening that's potentially going to be filled by Democrat. One of the things I found the most interesting about this is, one, that he's leading in fucking Georgia, but two, not only is he leading, he is significantly leading over the highest potential contender in the Republican Party, which is a woman by the name of Karen Handel, who I think is a former Secretary of State for Georgia.
Yeah, he's doing really well. In fact, he's basically got as many votes as all the rest of the candidates combined, more or less. When he is winning at such a level that it would be almost inconceivable that he could lose if this information is accurate, which hopefully it is.
Yeah, because I worked so well for this with Hillary.
Well, if Hillary had been up by like 45% or some crazy-ass thing, I'm pretty sure the election would have gone a different way.
That's actually one of the things I wanted to sort of talk about, was to compare and contrast these two. Because Ossoff, when I was reading through his CV, my first thought was, why didn't he run for president? And then I realized, because he's only 30 years old, and that's why he didn't run for president yet. The reason I'm sort of excited about this, it will become more obvious when I compare the two. Ossoff attended Georgetown University, and he earned a bachelor's from the School of Foreign Service. All right, so he already has more foreign service experience than our fucking president does right now. He studied under, according to Wikipedia, he studied under the former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, as well as an Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Named Michael Oren. Yes, Ossoff is Jewish, and he had a bar mitzvah and all that, so whatever. I guess if that's an issue for you, sorry, can't help you there. He also went on and got a Master's of Science degree from the London School of Economics. And the thing that I found interesting about that, because I'm like, well, yeah, but I think, Mick Jagger went to School of Economics, so whatever. But he wrote his thesis on trade relations between the U.S. and China. So again, he already knows more about trade relations with China than our fucking president does. He was a national security staffer. He drafted and managed legislative initiatives, had top secret clearance. He He was managing partner and CEO of a small business which targeted investigations against corrupt officials and organized crime. And he was also the executive producer for a documentary on ISIL. So
he's a liberal.
Yeah, he's a liberal. But he's also fucking educated. Well, yeah, sorry, liberal. Educated. What was I thinking?
Sorry, it's just the stats.
I know. Now, I wanted to compare that to the leading contender in Georgia is Karen Handel, who is a former Secretary of State.
Maybe I should butt in and say, by leading contender, recall again that he has about as much of the vote share, hypothetically, as all the rest of them combined, including this leading contender.
Yeah, he's about 3 times what she's got.
Yeah.
She, by contrast, she was born in D.C., grew up in Maryland. She went to Prince George Community College, and what I'm about to say is not a knock on community colleges. I went to a community college. I'm at AJ at a community college. The issue is not that she went to a community college. It's that she went there as well as the University of Maryland and still didn't complete a fucking degree. Okay?
How is that even possible?
I don't know. But then she went to work for Hallmark Cards. She also worked, for those of you old enough to remember, Dan Quayle, vice president under the first Bush. She worked for as a chief of staff for Quayle's wife, where they promoted breast cancer research and that type of stuff, which I'm totally for. She worked for several other companies, which when I see that, all I keep thinking is she can't hold a job. I mean, that's what I hear when I see a string of companies that she worked for. Okay?
It's a gig economy, man. It's a gig economy. What are you going to do?
I guess. Now, I did mention before that Ossoff was a CEO of a small business. So just so that you don't think I'm downplaying her experience, she was also the president and CEO of the Fulton County Chamber of Commerce, which I'm sure is probably the same as running business, I guess. I don't know. The thing that I actually wanted to point out the most, and this is the part where I'm going to sound like an asshole, hypocrite, sexist. She was, back in 2002, was a deputy chief of staff for then Governor Sonny Perdue. Now, Wikipedia describes her job as serving as a policy advisor, supervising constituent services, the governor's mansion, and general administration services. What I hear when I say that is she was his personal assistant. And I don't hear any sense that there was any real authority in what she did. I could be wrong. I mean, it's a fucking Wikipedia entry that takes one line. She did serve as Secretary of State for Georgia, which she did have a political position, which also means she is more experienced than our president.
I don't think she's unqualified to be a congresswoman.
No, certainly not.
Necessarily. I think this guy's a lot more qualified to be a congressperson.
Which is actually, I think, the bigger point when I was trying to compare and contrast these two is that it's not that she's not qualified to do the job. He just looks infinitely more qualified to not only do this job, but he actually, to me, looks more qualified than the guy running the fucking White House right now.
This would be a nice coup. And this is something, when we talk about the new spirit of activism and awareness, I guess, that we're sort of experiencing in the U.S. in the wake of Trump's cataclysmic victory, which, although he lost by 3 million votes, just wanted to remind you of that, Donald. 3 million, man.
3 million.
It's kind of embarrassing. 3 million. It's a lot to lose by. But in the wake of that, we on the left, or not even just on the left, anybody who's opposed to what is happening now in Washington, you really only have one outlet, and that is to get involved in politics. And we need to really get in the habit of taking wins whenever we can get them.
Every one we can get.
Every single race matters. I think that's the problem with the Democrats are the ultimate spike the ball in the 50-yard line party. You know, we're not even close to the end zone, and people were doing victory dances for Hillary Clinton before she even formally announced the run. So getting out of that habit and just thinking because we are the majority of the electorate, because we should see our will transmuted into politics somehow, that isn't actually how it works. You have to be aware of the local elections and particularly now of the Senate and congressional elections, because that is going to be the easiest way to wreck Trump, except for Russia, which will be probably another show coming up.
Every fucking seat matters at every level. Obviously, Congress is the big one, because without Congress, none of the rest of the shit works. If we control Congress, we can basically stop almost anything, as evidenced by how the Republicans operated when Obama was in charge. Every fucking seat matters in this stuff, and we have to act that way. Not only do we have to act that way now, we have to continue acting that way. I mentioned before in a previous episode when I was trying to find positive shit to look at I brought up Ossoff, but that's one of like half a dozen elections within the end of this year, the beginning of next year, before we get to the actual elections in November of 2018. You have to pay attention to all of these because every single one of them will matter. Obviously, we can't vote in these positions because most of them are outside of our state. You can absolutely fund these people. You can donate to their campaigns. You can promote them.
Just being a part of the buzz is a big thing in these off-season elections because how many people are really paying attention? But if a candidate is suddenly getting an influx of spontaneous support from all over the country for some special race, that is significant. It will be a shot across the bow next week if this guy smashes a race in Georgia. I think the Republicans are going to be going, oh shit.
Oh shit.
This is not in New York. This is not in California. This is not a district, San Francisco.
This is an unincorporated area of Georgia.
Right.
Okay?
This is seriously red territory, and this guy is not just winning by a little bit. He appears to be steamrolling, and I don't understand, given the policies of the Republicans and the policies of the Democrats, how in the hell do the Democrats lose? Somehow we managed to.
We do for a couple of reasons. Because, first of all, we assume that because we are the ones that represent policies that are not designed to hurt people, we assume that everybody's going to take that as that's a positive reason to do that. Sometimes it's much simpler than that. And part of the reason why it's so important to promote candidates like Ossoff is name recognition. People get to that fucking booth and they don't even know who some of these people are. They don't know anything about them. People don't know shit very often when they go to vote. And sometimes it's as simple as, oh, I know that guy's name. I've heard that before. It doesn't even matter what the context is. If you can't contribute financially, you can't vote because it's not your state. Fucking get that name out everywhere.
Yeah, you guys would have been amazed at some of the people that were walking around that I met and interacted with at the Bernie rallies, even back in the early times. People who had not really heard too much, but all of a sudden, they find that they're a part of a major political event, a movement, as a matter of fact. And I still don't think to this day Bernie Sanders has quite gotten the credit for what he put together, considering what he was running on and who he is, where he is in life, age-wise, etc. But hopefully this race here will, not only will we win it and grab a seat, which is the absolute most important primary objective, but secondarily, we can also get a bit more momentum, a bit more interest, more people engaged for a longer period of time, paying attention again because they know that things are coming up on the ballot. They know to be looking out for these different things and knowing that you can actually be involved in this day and age in social media campaigns. You can phone, you can usually call districts and help collect data from your house. I mean, there are all sorts of ways people can be involved in politics that just weren't even possible 50 years ago.
And here's one of the other things, and I hate bringing it up because it also sounds ageist. This dude's 30 years old, okay? Which means if he can get in that seat, he's going to be there a while. As long as he doesn't fuck anything up, make harassing calls to women about trips to the Caribbean, he could be there for a while. We, particularly on the left, have to play the long game. We just have to. Because right now, the right, especially with the short-term attention span president they've got right now, they're playing second to second, flying by the seat of their pants, moment to moment. You cannot keep winning that way. Yeah, you maybe sweep in and you take the seat, but it doesn't take long for even your supporters to go, this guy doesn't know what he's fucking doing.
Look, man, we're coming up on 100 days, and I don't know a single thing that Trump has passed. There's been no major legislative victory for him, no policy victory of any kind that would even substitute. And I'm sorry, bombing, we're not going to get into Syria, but ineffectively bombing an airstrip and spending a couple $1 million on bullshit is not going to cover for that. He didn't provide health care for everyone. He hasn't done anything.
Even the one thing that you wouldn't, but even one of the few things that the right considers a huge win for him, which is the nomination and confirmation of Gorsuch, still has nothing to do with his actual policy decisions. He was told, this is who you're putting up, and it didn't even matter to the right who it was. They just had to find somebody that would check all the boxes. All that meant was that they just wanted a guy, and of course it would be a guy, who was going to be anti-abortion and hard as hell on everybody, to be one of the ultimate conservatives. It didn't matter who it was going to be. It's not a policy decision Trump made. As near as I can tell, he had zero input on who it was actually going to be. He was provided a list of candidates. These are the people you're going to promote. It's the closest thing they've got to the long game. And even then, it feels like a short-term solution. And that's the biggest win or the biggest accomplishment Trump has at this point. Nearly 100 days in.
With this election coming up, hopefully we have an actual tangible
piece of evidence that we can point to that shows that, in fact, the tide of the country has already turned. Because if you can flip a red seat in Georgia on a special election after your party just swept into power in every chamber and just took the Supreme Court, and all of a sudden we have a little crack in that dam already because it seems to be a bit of a house of cards.
Hopefully, this movement will be the fan that blows that fucking house of cards over. So, again, final reminder, special election coming up. There's more of them. Keep an eye out for them. Do what you can to support these candidates. Because, as we always tell you, we need to organize, mobilize, protest,
vote.